Well, welcome to the Empowered to Connect podcast, where we come together to discuss a healing-centered approach to engagement and well-being for ourselves, our families, and our communities. I'm JD Wilson, and I am your host. And today on the show, we've got Dr. Casey Call from TCU. Dr. Call works with the Karyn Purvis Institute of Child Development, and she's got a really, really interesting story, starting off working as a school counselor and working in schools, and now transitioning into studying attachment, working at the KPICD full time. And she's got a ton to say, and we're just really grateful to her. She was a really, really fun interview, great interview. And so I think you're going to love it. Just note, this episode is split into two. Our interview with Dr. Call is split into two different episodes. And that's mainly because our content sort of separated out that way. And so you'll notice today we're going to talk about attachment theory, kind of what it is, how to wrap your brain around what attachment is and how it happens. And then in part two, it gets a little bit more specific. We're going to talk about attachment cycles. We're going to talk about attachment styles, and we're also going to talk about what they mean and how we can kind of take next steps in our attachment with those we care for and ourselves. And so, really think you're going to love it today. One note for you as you go into this episode is that you're going to notice a new look at ETC. We have rebranded, and our friend and graphic designer, Lachelle Robotham, has killed it. She's done an incredible job, and we love what she's come up with. We're really proud of it. At some point, there might be a whole episode where we choose to talk with her and talk about kind of the symbolism behind the new logos and colors and all of that. But for now, we'll just say we hope you enjoy it as much as we do. You'll also notice that our YouTube page has been totally revamped. So if you log on to YouTube this morning and search Empowered to Connect, you will find not only just a ton of content from Dr. Purvis, from Michael and Amy Monroe, from ETC from years past. You're also going to notice every episode of the podcast is hosted on YouTube as well. So if you are somebody that gets to the office and starts something on YouTube, just to have it playing in the background during the day, let it run with the ETC podcast and catch up on episodes you might have missed. We're also going to be periodically adding some new content here each week. And so we're really excited about what we've got coming for you in 2021. And lastly, just a note, as always, we would love your feedback. In 2020, we were pretty overwhelmed with the response from you guys. You know, we did not do a lot of work marketing and promoting the show, mainly because we wanted to see who the show was going to be serving. We didn't want to artificially inflate numbers. We wanted to really see what episodes are really making an impact. What are we getting the most feedback on? And we were really stunned. We have listeners this past year from 41 different countries. We're approaching 50,000 downloads on the show so far, and that's just incredible to us, and it's really humbling. So thank you for your support. Thank you for sharing it with friends. And as always, if you've got feedback for us, you want to let us know what you've really enjoyed, some things that you would love to see on the show going forward. We would love to hear from you. Genuinely, we really would love to hear from you. So you can give feedback through our Apple Podcast ratings and reviews. You can send them through our website, DM us on Instagram, shoot us a message on Facebook, or now on YouTube. Throw something in the comments on YouTube. But we would love to hear from you one way or another. Thank you for supporting us so far. We are so excited about the year to come, and we've got an incredible lineup for this spring for you guys. We're really excited. We really feel like the best is yet to come. So without any further ado, thanks for being here. Now, please enjoy our interview with Dr. Casey Call. Well, today we got a very special guest. It is Dr. Casey Call from TCU, and she is the Associate Director of Education there at the Karyn Purvis Institute of Child Development. And so Dr. Call is going to come with us today on a journey just talking all about attachment. But before we jump into that, why don't we just give you a chance, Dr. Call, to just share more about who you are and kind of your role at TCU, if you don't mind.
Sure. I'm excited to be here today. Thank you for asking me. And I guess I got into attachment work in 2007 and learning about attachment. Prior to that, I was a elementary school teacher, and then I went back to school and got a master's in counseling, and then I was a middle school and high school counselor. And then I wanted to get a PhD. I've known that pretty much my whole life, but I didn't know what in. And so I started looking at programs, and I really wanted to go back to TCU because I just loved it there. And I didn't find a program that was a good fit for me because their counseling area didn't have a PhD yet. And so I ended up applying and getting accepted into a school psychology program. And I was set to go to that. And then I got a TCU magazine in the mail for alumni over the summer. And there was a story about Dr. Purvis and Dr. Cross and about the Hope Connection camp that they were hosting for children who had been adopted. And I immediately, I can feel like my body like getting all sprinkly because that's how I felt when I read that article. I was like, this is where I want to be. This is what I want to do. And
That's
so
awesome.
I called Dr. Cross and I said, are you accepting any, students into your program? And he said, well, come and meet me. And this is just like Dr. Cross to just throw all the rules out the window, which I'm so thankful for in this case. But I went and met him. They were actually in the middle of a Hope Connection camp. So I got to go back and observe.
That's awesome.
I died. When I was sitting there watching Dr. Purvis work with the kids, I just had tears coming down my face because I thought, this makes sense to me. I didn't know why, and I didn't know any of the science behind it, but I knew that the way that she was working with children was the way that came naturally to me and the way that I wanted to do it. I wanted to learn more from her. I could have watched her all the time. And so I started the doctoral program that like a month later at TCU.
Mm-hmm.
And finished my program in 2012. Throughout that time, I got to host many Hope Connection camps with Dr. Purvis and learn from her. I accompanied her on several home programs that we did. I got to just help her and Dr. Cross while, sit in on conversations that they have when they were trying to figure out, why did this camp work so well? Why are we seeing the results that we're seeing? And kind of while they were fleshing out the principles and the strategies of TBRI, which is trust-based relational intervention. And so it felt like such an honor to be there. And I felt like I was in the right place at the right time. So.
That is awesome. I didn't know that you started off in schools, that you were working in that setting. So before we jump into attachment stuff, did any of that inform kind of your desire to go into attachment work? Like was seeing what you had seen through being a school counselor, was that part of your desire to look into attachment more?
I think so. I started out as a nursing major, so I've always wanted to help kids. That's always been my passion. And when I was an elementary teacher teaching third grade, it was a small school and we had 3 third grade teachers. And one of them was really good with kind of like traditional students. And one was really good with the gifted students. And then I was really good with the behavioral problem students,
Yeah.
And so I wouldn't label them that now. So I used air quotes.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure everyone knows
That's true.
the kids who came from hard places, the kids who had vulnerable backgrounds, who, had the behaviors that we were seeing in school. And I just fell in love with trying to figure out what worked for them, and how to support them emotionally and socially, and how to kind of, I don't know how, the academic part was important to me, but I was very much more concerned with the social emotional part. And so that's why I went back to school for counseling. And then as a counselor, I spent most of my time at a middle school. And while I wouldn't want to teach at a middle school because I don't know how they do it, being the counselor there was so rewarding and fun. And the connections that I got to make with the kids and hear about their struggles and what was going on with them, and seeing who had those strong social connections, to help them get through difficult places and who didn't, and kind of, how do you create that when it's not coming from their, primary caregivers?
That is incredible. That's awesome. So I guess without any further ado, let's jump right into the attachment work. And so for those who are coming in with either basic premise or just a faint idea even of what attachment is, do you mind just sharing like what is attachment and kind of giving us a history of the study of attachment?
Sure. So, like I said, I did my counseling program and then I came to TCU. And I just want to kind of back up just for a second to kind of give a big picture. But I don't remember learning about attachment theory in my counseling program. I mean, we may have read about it, but it wasn't, there wasn't any time spent on it. And so when I came to TCU and started learning from Dr. Purvis and Dr. Cross, and I learned about attachment theory, for me personally, it organized everything that I had been taught. And it organized all the behaviors I was seeing. It organized how families worked. It organized the challenging behaviors I was seeing. It just kind of provided the scaffolding for all of the work that I'd done before. And I just remember thinking, oh my gosh, I wish I knew this when I was teaching. I wish I knew this when I was, as a counselor. I had some of the instincts already, but just to have the science and the words and the framework for it, I think it organized the way that I thought about families and behavior and relationships. So
It's interesting because I feel like that very similar to me. The first time I heard something or read something, it was like a whole new set of lenses to view myself, to view my own motivations and behaviors, to view like, oh, this is why this is happening in my marriage, or this is why this is happening in my family. Like it was like a whole new set of lenses to see relationships, humanity, motivations. Like it is so incredibly eye-opening. So I'm excited for those of us, the listeners that we might have today, that this is the first time they're thinking about attachment in this kind of way and its impacts on us personally, and how attachment theory really is a huge part of just human behavior, that we can kind of jump into that. So can you tell us a little bit about the history of attachment theory and the study of it? Like give us a little bit of a history lesson.
Okay, so John Bowlby is known as the father of attachment, and he started looking at children who back then were known as juvenile delinquents. And he started looking at what were some of their similar circumstances, and some of the things that he saw were that they had, that they didn't have, consistent caregivers. And so that got him thinking about, what is the importance of early relationships? When we think about attachment, what it really means is a bond between two people. I mean, that's just the most basic definition. But when we think about attachment theory, I like to add to it that it's that bond between two people that develops through patterned interactions with our caregivers. And so I think that patterned interactions is really what's important. And it's how we learn how relationships work. From our very early caregiving is how we kind of set up, they call it in science, it's called an internal working model. But I think of it as like our parameters or our scaffolding for how do relationships work. Do we turn towards people when we're distressed, or do we turn towards, other things when we're stressed out? Do we value ourselves? Do we have self-worth? Do we know that our voice matters, that if we talk, someone's going to listen? So these are all the things. So attachment, I guess in its simplest form, is a bond between two people. But when we think about attachment theory, it's those patterned interactions that happen over and over and over again in our early caregiving that kind of defines attachment theory. And so I did a book study with some graduate students last summer, and we read a book about SMART therapy, which is sensory motor arousal regulation treatment. So it's kind of a mouthful, but it talks about the way that they talk about attachment is they use the words rhythms of engagement. And I don't know why, but that just stuck with me. I think that's beautiful. So it's how are the rhythms of engagement with the person that's supposed to nurture you and care for you and reflect back your preciousness and your joy. And so what are those rhythms? That goes kind of with the patterned interactions, is that rhythms of engagement. I just thought that was a really beautiful way to talk about attachment.
So is when I think that, even as I'm listening to you talk, I think about how frequently when the conversation around attachment comes up, I immediately think of only about kids, and I think of kids through adoption or in foster care or kids in kind of storybook extreme circumstances, And as you're talking, I'm just reminded I've got an attachment style, and like I had rhythms of engagement with my caregivers growing up and those who were consistent in my life, and as did Tana, as did you. And so I don't know if you want to kind of detour for a moment away from kids just to remind parents and caregivers how do we look at that within ourselves, and why is it important for us to understand that as caregivers for kids?
That's a big question. I will I will attempt to dive into it a little bit. I think one of the most important. So there was a study at the University of Minnesota, and it's a longitudinal study. And so what they did is they started working with young pregnant women who were in their like late teens, and they followed them for over 40 years. So they started in, I think it was 1974, which is the year I was born. So I know it was 40. Well, I don't even know how old I am, 46 years ago. And they followed those women and their babies, and then their babies have grown up and had babies. And so they followed them, and they've been able to collect data for multiple generations. And what they have found is the long-term outcomes, and I think we're going to get into the different classifications of attachment. But what they found is that if those children, those babies at 18, 12 to 18 months who were secure in their attachment with their caregivers had better long-term outcomes as adults. So if we're thinking just, okay, what is the importance of understanding our own attachment as an adult? One thing is for our caregiving behaviors. So if we can understand where our history is, what patterns we fall into, what rhythms of engagement we have, what happens to us when we feel safe, what do we do? What happens to us when we're stressed? What do we do? If we can have some self-awareness around that, it's going to help us to be better caregivers. But another thing is if we think about attachment from an adult perspective, it's even if we didn't get that as a child, we can get that from healthy relationships as an adult. I think that's another hopeful thing. It's never too late.
Yeah.
So
that's awesome.
There's a thing called earn secure in adulthood. And that means you didn't have, this warm, supportive, consistent caregiver, but you found people along the way to teach you what healthy relationships looked like, so you could develop those kind of healthy relationship skills.
Which brings so much hope, right, into that conversation. Why don't we sort of work backward from that? So you talk about, the possibility of growing up without that attachment. What happens when that attachment cycle is disrupted or broken in some form or fashion? And kind of, I'm assuming that study also speaks to, disrupted attachment along the way.
Mm-hmm. So I always teach this in a couple of different ways when I'm working with our child development students. There's a couple of ways that you can teach attachment. And one is, in the broad sense, it's just a way to view human development. So that's kind of the big sense. If you get down, another way to kind of describe it is it's a regulation. It's a way to teach regulation. So if we're feeling stressed out and a caregiver comes and meets our needs, that teaches us that our voice matters, for one thing, that we have a voice. It teaches us that we have worth because someone's coming to help us meet our needs. And it teaches us that we have efficacy, which kind of goes with the voice, that when we speak, someone listens, right? And so it's a regulation. Attachment theory is also a regulation theory, and that's one way you can teach it. So if you have a consistent, nurturing, warm caregiver who's meeting your needs on a regular basis, not 100% of the time. So parents, You don't have to do it.
Okay, let us break just one moment and give
Yes.
us hope that this does not mean super parents. This just
No.
means parents who are doing an average job here. Like, you know,
Right.
Yeah.
somewhat attuned, somewhat mindful that our children are crying and we should help them.
Right. That's right. It is not perfect parenting by any
right.
means. It
That's
is good enough
Yeah.
parenting.
Just
So-
do it. Just paying attention to your baby's needs.
Yes.
Meet your baby's needs on a consistent rhythmic. I wrote that rhythms of engagement.
Rhythms of engagement. Right.
Yeah, carry
What
on.
are the patterns they're learning? That's what I always like to think is like, if you look at it from the baby's perspective, what are they learning? So they're learning when they have a need, someone's going to meet it, right? Most of the time. Okay. They're learning, oh, I must be pretty cute because this, this caregiver is looking in my eyes and smiling and their eyes are glowing and they're twinkling and they're, there's this rhythm of engagement back and forth between talking and cooing. And so I must be pretty special, right? And I must have worth. I must have a voice. I must matter. I have preciousness. I have that inherent worth that I think many of us are looking for, right? That I am worthy. I don't have to achieve anything. I don't have to do anything. Just me being this little baby is enough, right? So I kind of lost my reference of where we were going from there.
I was thinking about attachment as a dance of that.
Yes.
Like just we're dancing together. So kiddo expresses a need and the caregiver meets the need, and that attachment dance that happens in rhythm and in sync. We hope, as you were talking, Casey, a little video came to mind. Maybe some of y'all have seen it, and it's this little baby on a changing table, and it's a dad, and the dad is like dancing. I'm dancing on the screen. The podcaster people cannot see me dancing. I cannot do that. So y'all just imagine that I'm dancing, and the dad is dancing, and the baby just dances back, kicking their feet, and then the dad stops, and the baby stops, and the dad starts, and the baby starts, and they are in rhythm together. And there's this little sweet dance of relationship that's happening right there. And I look at it, the first time I saw it, I just teared up. I'm like, this dad is reflecting back to this baby that they are seen, and that their like physiology can even be mirrored in that way. You dance, I dance, you dance, and we're in sync together. And so that to me is like this little really beautiful picture, simply a playful engagement, building that trust through a little attachment. And that's not even a distressing need.
Yeah.
That's just the need for like playful engagement, and it's being met, right? It's not just when we meet our kids in their distress, but even when we meet them in their play.
Yeah, it makes me think of Dr. Purvis used to call that the attachment dance. And so whether we call it an attachment dance or we call it rhythms of engagement or patterned interactions, what it means is that we're in tune with each other. We're attuned with each other. Have you ever played the mirror game where you stand face to face with somebody, and when they move their arm, you move it in the same way? And when they, move their leg up, you want to be attuned to what is their needs, and also attuned to the joy, right?
Yeah.
So we've got to be in the video that you were talking about. I haven't seen that, but that makes me so happy. It makes me think of another video of a dad, and you see him doing a cheer out on it looks like a New York street, and he's doing a cheer, and then the angle widens up, and he's doing it with his daughter, and it is the cutest thing. But they're just saying the motions and doing the dance and just really having joy and being playful with each other. And so when you think of rhythms of engagement, what are the benefits of that? That goes back to that regulation theory we were talking about. It helps when we have that attuned relationship, that dance with someone. We're able to better regulate our bodies, our brains, our thoughts, our emotions, all of those things. So sometimes it's known as a regulation theory.
Okay, so I start to get a little bit of a lump in my throat when we talk about this, and we're like talking about these sweet moments of parents and kids and all that. And for a lot of us listening and obviously I say Tana and I both, like our kids, some came through adoption. And so when you think about that, there's obviously in that story or in that scenario, there's a disruption in that natural attachment cycle that was normally established. And so can you talk about what happens in that? Because I think one of the important things for us to kind of note as we're listening is we're not, like the phrase biological parents just came out for the first time. We keep talking about caregivers. And so will you talk about when a disruption happens in an attachment cycle, what happens? And then is there hope to be able to repair that?
Yeah. So can I talk about is it okay if I talk about the attachment cycle and then what happens when the needs aren't met? Would that be a good
I
way
guess.
to
Sure.
introduce
Yeah.
it? Okay. Well, one of the things that we use to describe attachment is the attachment cycle. And so in the simplest way that I can describe it is a child has a need and a caregiver meets that need. And so when they have that need, they're distressed. So they're crying or they're whining or they're whatever. And then when their need is met, they calm down. So when they're upset, when they have that need, there's several things going on at the same time. One is that their sympathetic nervous system has been activated. And that sympathetic nervous system is the one that puts you on high alert. So your pupils dilate, your muscles get tight, you're not digesting food like you normally do. You might see the shoulders raise up, you might see the jaw tense. So it's preparing you for action, right? And so when your sympathetic nervous system is activated, then when that baby's need is met, then their parasympathetic nervous system comes in and regulates the sympathetic nervous system, and it provides the calm, okay, let's relax our muscles, our pupils go back, we feel safe. Another thing that's happening in our brain is our neurotransmitters. And so we have excitatory neurotransmitters that get activated when we're distressed. We have inhibitory neurotransmitters that come on board that help regulate when our needs are met. Most of your listeners have probably heard of the amygdala or the HPA axis. My husband was trying to talk about the amygdala last night, and he was like, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, are you talking about amygdala? And he was like, yeah. He didn't know what it was, but sorry. But the amygdala is your fear center. And so it's the center that it's looking out for threats. It's your threat detector. And so when you're distressed, your HPA axis is set off, and cortisol is released, and all these chemicals that are getting you ready for action are released. And then when that need's met, you've got the brakes are put on your HPA axis and your system, and so you can be calm. So I always tell new parents, think about how many times your baby has a need in a 24-hour period of time. I mean, if you're talking about newborns, it's like
Yes.
hundreds? I don't know.
Yeah, momentarily, right.
Yeah, like from second to second. So when we think about that, we've got all of these systems at work when a child has a need, and then their need is met. And so when we talk about patterned interactions, this is what we're talking about, rhythms of engagement. What happens? Do we have a caregiver that comes in and meets that need so that calming side of the attachment cycle can be activated? And so what you're talking about is if we don't have a safe caregiver, then our attachment cycle is kind of missing half of it. So what happens is we have this need and our HPA axis is activated. Our muscles are tense. Our sympathetic nervous system is activated. Our excitatory neurotransmitters are activated. But then we stay in that, fight, flight, or freeze system. We stay there and we don't come down. So when you think about rhythms of engagement or regulation, you can see how an infant who does have a consistent caregiver is learning how to regulate. Oh, I'm distressed. Oh, now I'm calm. Oh, I'm distressed. Now I'm calm. But if you don't have that other half of the attachment cycle, if you don't have a caregiver to help meet your needs consistently, warmly nurturing all of that, then you're kind of stuck. It's like you're kind of stuck in that fight, flight, or freeze system. And so until you have healthy relationships, you're kind of there. And it's hard. And what it normally comes out as, and we can talk about attachment classifications, but it can look multiple ways. It can look different ways. But it typically comes out in behavior and in relationships.
Interesting. That is so interesting. Okay. So we know kind of scientifically we're able to repair that attachment. And can you kind of talk about that process of repairing attachment and what that looks like for somebody who's had a disruption?
Yes, I think I want to back up just a little bit and say that the reason that we have these kids who aren't getting their needs met, who are showing, really dysregulated emotions and behavior, it's because they're survivors. They haven't given up.
Mm,
They're saying, hey, you didn't come meet my needs, but I'm going to try everything I know how to do to get them met on my own. It makes me think of the still face paradigm where that little baby and that mom, you can tell they're attuned, and then the mom stops reacting, and the baby tries, I think it's like 10 or 12 different strategies to get the mom's attention.
yeah.
She points, she smiles, she makes a face, she whines, she cries, she does all of these things trying to get her needs met, and those are survival skills.
Yeah.
Yep.
So when we think about these kids that don't get that second part of the attachment cycle, and they have these behaviors or these dysregulations, we have to view those as, wow, they have survived. They have tried to get their needs met in the best way that they know how, which just makes my heart sad, you know?
I think it's interesting because I think that major mindset shift that you just talked about right there,
Mhm.
really, like if we let that settle in, it really can change the way that we view children, and children do grow up to be adults. And so even just behavior in general, and can give us a really compassionate mindset, I think, and a way to honor people. Like it allows us to honor behavior for the adaptive strategy that it is.
Yeah.
And instead of our kids, like you air quoted us earlier, right? Instead of them being behavioral problems, they are really beautifully resilient human beings
That's
doing
so
their
good.
very, very best
Yes.
within the capacity that they have outside of their control, because of circumstances and situations, to show up in the world the best way they can. And so, like, if we can reframe that thing, then there is so much growth and capacity to like move forward together. And so, at the top of the episode, when we talked about like when you start thinking about attachment, it really can shift so much of how you view people and behavior.
Yeah.
Which is why I love it so much. I mean, it just really does get me so excited because it can move us to this place of not pity. Like we don't
Right.
want to pity. That's not the right. It's more like empathy and compassion that moves us towards cheerleading action.
Mhm.
You totally have this. Look at how strong and resilient and capable you are to communicate your needs, even if they come off in ways right now that are out of the acceptable behavior in this circumstance. Okay. But you still have the tenacity to communicate that you have a need. And so we've got a long way to go with kids. So it's never too late. That's Tana's little preachy thing. And understanding attachment and understanding that resilient piece, I think, is what gets you to being able to see the hope for kids. It is never too late.
The parents at that first camp that Dr. Purvis led, they named it the Hope Connection Camp because the first time in their, with their children, they felt hope because
Yeah.
they saw things that they could
Yeah.
do. And I think Darren talks about this. Darren Jones from the Institute talks about this when he said that when he first learned about TBRI, that he stopped looking like dreading challenges from kids and he started looking at it as an opportunity. And to me, if you can switch your mindset to say, oh my goodness, and like you said, no pity, but I am so sad that this baby, even if they're 15 or 16 and taller than me, that this baby didn't get what they needed at some point in their life. And I have an opportunity to show them what healthy relationships look like. I have an opportunity. That's why they say, I always tell my students this, they say it takes one person, and I think, and sometimes my students get a little discouraged because they, may have limited time to work with a student. And I always say, it's like we're planting seeds. You've got that one teacher in kindergarten that teaches what healthy relationships look like and that what safety feels like. And then you have that coach in soccer. And then you have that youth director at church, and you have all of these people, your caseworker, if you're in the child welfare system. And so I think what you said, that compassion piece can really be built through understanding attachment theory and understanding the survival strategies that many kids have been charged with developing.
Well, you mentioned working in schools and being drawn to the kids who have, again, air quotes, behavioral challenges. And I used to work in schools in a similar setting as well. And same, I had a network of after-school programs, and it was almost full with kids who served a suspension, if not once a week, at least some point during a semester. And yet we never had any issues. And I think one of the things that helps so much is this perspective that you talked about, and what it led to is as much of an asset-based view as it was. Like, it was a mindset from a deficit-based view to an asset-based view, where learning about the brain and resiliency and how it works, knowing these kids are like kids who, it's like an athlete who has been super trained in one muscle group and just needs to balance back out the other. Like, they've got the biggest biceps in the world and just need to work on their leg strength a little bit to be able to hold that big upper body up, right?
Yes.
And so it helped me, I think, to drive even a huge level of respect for the kids that we were working with, to go, man, you've been through so much. It gave me great confidence. You've been resilient, you made it this far. I know we can get further. I just got to teach you to trust me. And then once you trust me, I know we've got this thing. We can go. That mindset shifts. I mean, even if we just clip out one part of the conversation today, I think is worth, it is worth the price of admission to come in. So I tell you what, why don't we actually pause right there? We'll pause our conversation right there. And for those of you who are frustrated, we're leaving on a cliffhanger right now. Good, because now you'll come back next week to listen as well. What we'll talk about next week are the attachment styles. And so do you want to kind of explain just a little overview of that, Dr. Call, and then we'll come back next week and talk through that a little bit more.
Sure. So there are 3 primary attachment styles, and then another one. So next week, I'll talk about how you assess attachment and kind of the different styles and what behaviors do you see with those styles, and then what are the outcomes, and then how does that carry over into adulthood.
Awesome. So make sure you join us next week on the Empowered to Connect podcast to hear about attachment styles with Dr. Call. Dr. Call, thanks, and we will see you next week.
Bye.
Well, that was great, wasn't it? I really hope that you enjoyed Dr. Call's first part of the episode as much as we did. We're going to be back next week with her to talk about kind of part 2 of attachment, where we'll talk about the attachment styles. And really, I mean, I think I say this every week. You won't want to miss it. But if you enjoyed part 1, trust me, part 2 is equally as important. And you don't want to miss that content that's coming next week. Just a reminder, shoot us some feedback, either in the comments section, leave a rating, leave a review. It really helps us be discovered by other people who might be searching for the same kind of content that you are here. And lastly, go check out our YouTube page and let us know what you think. And we will see you next week for Tad Jewett, who brings us our music, for Kyle Wright, who edits our episodes and engineers them, and for Mo and Tana Ottinger at ETC, I'm JD Wilson, and we will see you next week on the Empowered to Connect podcast.